Hello everyone, my name is Rich. This is a live stream from the University of Cambridge Museums, and today we are in the Graham Robertson room, which is part of the Fitzwilliam Museum, and we are going to be talking about an extraordinary set of prints with Rebecca from the museum, and this is in connection to, well, as I'm sure most of you know, this Sunday is Remembrance Sunday. It's going to mark 100 years since the end of the First World War. So we have these extraordinary prints that are connected to that moment in history, and Rebecca, who is a research assistant here, is going to tell us all about them. In fact, you might even be able to see a glimpse of them in this mirror behind me. We thought this was a fancy way to start the stream. So what do I need to tell you? So yeah, I'm Rich. I work across the 8 museums and the Botanic Garden. Behind the camera, or the phone, that's what we use, is Hannah. So Hannah's going to, if you have any questions, you can put them in the comments, and Hannah will stop us at any point as we're having a conversation and ask your questions. So please do, if you have any kind of question, ask it. They're going to be better than the questions I have. I'm pretty certain of that. Also, tell us where you're watching from. That's always of interest. And otherwise, I think, maybe if you could share it, that's always good as well, because we want as many people to see this as possible. So I think that's my intro done. So should we go and see Rebecca?
Yeah.
So follow me. And there's, well, I won't say anything too much about the prints because Rebecca's going to tell you more about those. Hello, Rebecca.
Hello.
So let's start off with the room we're in. Yeah. So the Graham Robertson room. Yeah. What's this room all about?
So this is Graham Robertson Study Room. It's part of the Department of Paintings, Drawings and Prints. And this is where students and researchers can come to view works from the collection. So you can make an appointment to come view anything. The majority of our collections are not on permanent display and are in storage. But you can come, make an appointment to come and view anything. And if you do, this is where you come to view.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And we were talking before about the fact that actually these prints we're going to talk about haven't actually been on show before. So this is a really a great opportunity for us to talk about them and to share them with everyone who's watching. Yeah. Also, we were talking about the fact that this room was open during the Cam Late, so the late evening event we had on Wednesday, which was a feminist takeover at the Fitzwilliam. Yes. And it was amazing. It was lovely to see people coming in and having a look at the prints on show. Yeah. Then, so we have a series of prints here. Can you just give us an overview of what we're going to be talking about?
So these prints take us back to the start of 1917, so just over 100 years ago, a time when Britain had been at war with Germany for 3 years. Millions had already died, and the US was still not in the war, fighting Germany with the Allies. So this is a time when the Department of Information, which was the propaganda wing of the government, decided it had to step up the campaign to maintain public support for the war. Right. And so they came up with the idea of this print portfolio called The Great War, Britain's Efforts and Ideals. There were 66 lithographs in it in total, and it was designed to appeal both to the people at home, the Allies in France, and also to encourage, at this point, it suggests it was proposed in February 1917, so quite early in 1917. At this point, it was designed to maybe encourage neutral countries like the US to join in the war, to join the fight with Britain and France against Germany.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, and so these were commissioned
by the government.
Okay,
yeah.
Right. Ministry of Information.
It became the Ministry of Information in 1918. It was sort of renamed. It sort of went through, from 1914, it went through various different sort of titles and sort of conglomerations, and it was remodelled at the start of 1917 in a bid to sort of step up this propaganda campaign. Yeah. And became the Department of Information. It was then renamed the Ministry of Information in 1918. So our prints were given to us by the Ministry of Information, which is basically the same as the propaganda wing of the government. given to us in 1919 at the end of the war by the Ministry of Information. And all our prints are still in their original mount, so these are all 100 years old. The series was published by the Avenue Press, and I don't know, Hannah, if you can zoom in on that A there, so the A is for Avenue Press, they were the publisher of the portfolio. And so all the titling is all original as well. And they've recently, in sort of in view of the fact that they are 100 years old now, they've just been given some new housing by our paper conservator Harry Metcalf. Making these lovely boxes for them, because the original, I'll show you the original wrappers of the portfolios. They're all still in these, but they were sort of 100 years old. The original wrappers, that they came in. They were given to us in these in 1919. Yeah. So these have now been given stronger housing to give them a bit more support.
Excellent. Right, amazing. So they commissioned artists. Yes. So these would have been quite well-known artists.
Yeah, lots of well-known artists were involved in this project. So artists like Frank Brangwyn, this is by Frank Brangwyn here. Artists like William Rothenstein, William Nicholson, Augustus John were involved. George Clausen. So well-known artists, but also a couple of younger artists who were at the time were lesser well-known. Charles Richard Wynne Nevinson, C.R.W. Nevinson, and Eric Kennington. And they were, the Department of Information thought that it was quite important to include these two young artists, because they'd actually, all the other artists were well established and were quite old, and so they actually hadn't served on the front lines. Okay. So Kennington had served as a private in the 13th Battalion, the London brigade, called the London Regiment, called the Kensingtons, so he'd actually fought. Right. And Nevinson hadn't been able to join up because he'd had a limp from childhood, but he'd served as volunteered as an ambulance driver on the front lines. Okay. So they both witnessed the war at first hand.
And you can understand why that would be important in terms of how they, talk about or showcase the war. Yeah. Do we want to have a look at some of these? I mean, you talked about, I think you might have mentioned ideals and efforts. I did. So can you just explain the sort of difference between the two? Yeah.
So the portfolio was a two-part portfolio. There were ideals and efforts. So the ideals came first. There were 12 of these. These are 3 of the 12. They were all designed by different artists. So I've got Frank Brangwyn here, an artist called Francis Ernest Jackson in the middle, and then Edmund Dulac at the end there. So these were all sort of quite large in size. You can see the difference in size between the efforts and the ideals. So these are supposed to be reminding people why the war was going on, what were we fighting for, what were we defending. Yeah. And so ideals, high-minded values such as truth, democracy, freedom, all of these sorts of things are represented in the ideals using allegory and historical reference.
Yeah, and so the use of colour.
And the use of colour, and the large size is referencing this idea of importance, this traditional idea that history painting and religious paintings were presented on a larger scale. Yeah. So and the efforts, by contrast, are all in monochrome. So no colour, slightly smaller in scale, so that they're sort of chiming with this idea of journalism, reportage, that has a ring of truth about it.
Right.
So the efforts were presenting what was happening at home, really. So workers in the munitions factory, the war effort in general. So. From building ships to making guns, and all of the titles are really concentrating on war as a creative process. So we've got making soldiers, making sailors, making aircraft, making guns,
really
rather than destructive.
Sure.
So there's this sort of positive gloss to the efforts.
Right, I see.
And so the designed to boost morale as well, to show people, look at all these people working in all these industries, contributing to the war effort. This is so important. And so it's boosting morale at home.
Right, okay, which should have been huge
at this stage in the war, after 3 years of fighting with no end. I mean, we know the war ended, effectively at the end of 1918, but they didn't know that. Yeah. They didn't know how long it's going to go on for. The US still are not in the war at the start of 1917, so it's incredibly important to produce something like this. And I should also just say that, prints, in comparison to oil paintings, prints are so much easier to distribute. You can produce thousands of them.
Of course.
So you've got the numbers. You can distribute these more widely. They were exhibited. So the scheme was finished in the summer of 1917. The first public exhibition was at the Fine Arts Society in London in July. And then they toured the major cities of the UK. They were also sent over to be exhibited to the Allies in Paris, and also they were also sent over to the US and were exhibited in New York and Los Angeles.
Okay.
By this time, actually, the US had entered the war.
Right.
I think probably in the spring of 1917. So by the time they were exhibited in the summer of 1917, it was more, sort of keeping up the momentum. So I don't think the first US troops had landed for training in France until June. So it was quite early days for them.
Right. So when they were commissioned.
Yes, when they commissioned, the US wasn't in the war.
Right. I see.
So this is right at the beginning of February. So they still weren't in it.
Yeah.
So Hannah's got a question.
So just to say that Jessie, Amanda, Eleanor and Rachel all kind of say hello.
Nice.
And we have a question, which is, from the prints shown, do you, Rebecca, have a favourite?
It's probably a toss-up between the Ernest Jackson or the Edmund Dulac. And I have to say, I absolutely love an Evanson swooping down on a tower as well, which is pretty incredible. And the Clouton in the furnace is pretty amazing.
Okay, well that actually brings us on quite nicely,
because
we can talk about the ideals now, if you like. And that they are really stunning images. There's some different sort of styles going on, which you'd expect from different artists. Do you want to talk about one of these in particular first?
I do.
Yeah?
I'm going to start with Ernest Jackson's ideal, because Ernest Jackson was probably little known now, but is actually probably the most important artist in the whole project. He trained as an artist in Paris, but he was also attached to, trained with a commercial lithographer, and he became a master lithographer, so he was hugely into lithography, and he'd been teaching lithography in London art schools from 1902. He actually taught C.R.W. Nevinson lithography in 1912. Okay. So he was a technical advisor to the scheme. So he was the person who commissioned all the artists. Yeah. He advised them on materials, advised them on technique, and he oversaw the printing process.
Sure.
So he was really important, and he's also founder member of a group. So lithography was on the rise really from the late 19th century. It started to become a technique that was thought to offer experimental possibilities for artists. And it started off in France, probably Degas, and then artists like Whistler and Fontaine-Latour brought this sort of experimental possibility of lithography to London.
Okay.
And artists started to become interested in it as an artistic process.
Right. And can you? I always think printing processes are sometimes quite hard to explain.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
But can you attempt it?
I can. Okay, so lithography. So we have to go back to the 1790s to discover the inventor of lithography. He was a German playwright called Alois Senefelder, and he wanted to find a way of printing his plays more cheaply. And he discovered, by experimenting with a limestone slab and some greasy ink, that he could create a way of printing from the surface of the limestone. The way in which he did this, and the way in which stone lithography works, is it's basically a chemical process. So it's printing from a flat surface, which is in contrast to other printmaking techniques like, say, woodcut, which where the lines are raised up, the printed lines are raised up above the surface. And techniques like etching and engraving, the printed lines are below the surface, so the gouging, the ink is in below the surface. So lithography is what we call a planographic technique, where you're printing from a flat surface. And the way in which this is made possible is that it's based on the principle that oil and water don't mix. Right. So what happens is you get your limestone slab of stone, and you grind it until it's smooth and level, and then you draw on it or paint on it, or draw or paint with a greasy ink, greasy crayon, greasy pencil, anything a medium that has a lot of oil in it. Yeah. So there's this oily ink called touche, which I'm going to talk about when we look at the technique that Edmund Dulac has used more closely. And you can actually paint that on.
Okay.
So it's like a watercolour. You can have that. You can make that sort of as thick or as liquid as you want.
Yeah.
So what happens? You draw on the stone, and then you make the non-drawn on areas receptive to water.
Okay.
So you do that by washing the stone with a chemical called gum arabic, and that opens up the non-drawn on areas, and so they want the water. They want water. Where the gross greasy areas will repel water.
I see.
So you keep before you apply the printing ink, you wet the stone, and so all of those areas that haven't been drawn on by the greasy materials will absorb the water. And then when you come to apply the printing ink, those parts of the stone will repel the ink, whereas the areas that have been drawn on by the greasy materials will attract it. So that's how it works.
I think that was a really good explanation, because I actually understand it, and more often than not I don't with printing. So no, that makes complete sense.
Good.
Thank you.
Okay.
Excellent. And obviously all of these images have quite strong messaging within them. I mean, this one in particular.
This is so fascinating because when he trained in Paris, Ernest Jackson became quite enamoured of a French artist called Puvis de Chavannes, and he sort of became known as the painter of France. He painted lots of allegorical mural painting in many public buildings in France. Yeah. And Ernest Jackson was quite enamoured of him, and he recommended Puvis' paintings to all of his students. And what he's done here is he has referenced a couple of paintings by Puvis de Chavannes, which Puvis made at the time of the Franco-Prussian War. So essentially, this is a reference to France at war with Germany, and Prussia was a very, very powerful state in Germany. So this is a reference to France at war with Germany in 1870, so the Franco-Prussian War, 1870, 1871. So Puvis made these. They're sort of pendant companion paintings. Show that they're both actually in the Musée d'Orsay now in Paris. So the balloon and the pigeon. And you can probably see some similarities here. This sort of monumental female figures, the rear view. This sort of cracked up arm here. You can see also these references. Also the Church of Notre Dame in Paris is referenced also in Ernest Jackson's lithograph. And so what he's doing here is so this is this bird here at the top here. Both of these paintings represent the siege of Paris. Right. The Prussians locked the French in. It's kind of like a risky reference, really, because of course France lost the Franco-Prussian War. Right. Prussia defeated them. Yeah. But this is Ernest Jackson referencing this Prussian hawk. The Prussians sent hawks to. Because the only way that the French had of communicating in the siege of Paris was by sending out carrier pigeons with messages.
I see.
So the outside and balloons to send to get people out of Paris. That was the only way they could do this. So this is the sort of the Prussian hawk, one of the hawks that was sent to catch the carrier pigeons before it could send messages out. So in Ernest Jackson's image, we have the hawk that the Prussians were sending to kill the carrier pigeons. Yeah. It's now the Imperial German eagle. So this represents Imperial Germany. With the crown, the black eagle is Imperial Germany. We see also in Dulac's image. This is Germany defeated. So Puvis de Chavannes' hawk has become the German Imperial eagle. But so this is a time of under siege. Paris is France is effectively defeated by the Prussians in the Franco-Prussian War. Yeah. But in Ernest Jackson's image, we're getting a second chance. France is getting a second chance. And this is France coming back against Germany, because this time is different. This time France has an ally, has a friend, England. I see. You can see the cross of St. George on the sword hilt, and England is preparing to unsheath the sword and defeat the Imperial Eagle of Germany. So this is a very strong, powerful image. It's, sort of a chance for all of this defeat, to be actually remastered into victory. Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a strong message, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a real strong message.
Also just so interesting to see an influence for the artists, and applying that to their work, which so many artists do. Yeah. But the messaging behind that is it's even more clever, isn't it? It really is. Yeah. Now, can we quickly talk about this image here, because it's such a different style, and there's a lot of sort of energy and movement in this. and a giant octopus.
And a giant octopus. So this is Frank Brangwen's image, Freedom of the Seas. So this is his ideal. So freedom of the seas was a concept that sort of a legal principle that came into play around 1908, which was supposed to help neutral countries at time of war. It was basically, you know, we must not blockade the oceans. There must be freedom of movement. We must be able to, you know, have freedom of movement around the oceans, and countries must not, you know, blockade or stop people doing this at times of war. This was a concept that both Germany and Britain flouted, and once First World War started. So we see her freedom of the sea. So this is England. The octopus, this is Germany. So why is Germany represented as a giant octopus? Well, I think the reason what Brangwen is referencing here is the way in which octopuses, I think since the late 19th century, had been used on propaganda maps as basically a critique of imperialism. So we have these sort of, I mean, this is, I'll talk more about this in a minute, but this is the sort of thing that I'm thinking of. This is giant octopuses whose tentacles were reaching out to grab land and power. And it wasn't just Britain and Germany who were represented in this way. Other empires like Russia, Japan, they were all presented as, you know, grasping imperial octopuses, you know, grabbing. Yeah,
I don't know if, Hannah, you can get close to that, because it's just, it is actually interesting to see the use of the octopus.
What's really interesting about this is actually a propaganda map that was produced by Germany. In 1918, so with the same title, Freiheit der Meer is Freedom of the Seas. So Brangwen is here saying Germany is this grasping, you know, enemy who is, you know, is doing, you know, the wrong thing, and here Germany is presenting Britain in the same way. We've got this is us. This is the Union flag here on the octopus, and so. Yeah, we get both sides, you know, basically essentially using this image of the octopus for propaganda.
Right, excellent. Thank you.
So that's where that comes from.
Right, okay. Well, of the ideals, we have one more to look at here. Should we have a look at that?
Yeah.
And just a reminder to anyone who's watching, if you have any questions, please do ask them, and we'll see if Rebecca can answer them. No pressure. But so tell us about this one.
So this is Edmund Dulac, who was known as a sort of an artist who was producing these amazing dual light watercolours that ended up in Deluxe Illustrators books. And his ideal is Poland. It's called Poland, a Nation. So this is Poland. Now Poland is represented here as a winged hussar. I don't know if many people know what winged hussars are, but they were basically the elite Polish military, the elite Polish cavalry in the Polish army, and they operated from the 15th to the 18th century. So by the time 1917's come along, this is now a historical figure. So Dulac here is representing Poland at a time of military might, military power, and it's really become a national symbol for Poland now, the winged hussar. I should just explain why did these men wear, why were they wearing wings,
really
why are they
useful.
wearing the animal skins? Okay, so the wings were made, they put ostrich feathers basically, or swan feathers, really, really large feathers on these things that they wore on their backs, and they wore animal skins. And these were designed so the wings, when they charged, the wings made lots of noise, and the animal skin, you know, the smell of wild animals, I think it's like a leopard skin, the smell of wild animals, so the noise and the smell of wild beasts was supposed to spook the horses of the opposing side. So that's what these are for. And just a little plug for the Royal Armouries Museum in Leeds, because I went to see show of not the winged hussars, but people who recreate what the winged hussars did. You know, their horses, and they have the wings. So if you're interested in seeing a recreation of what the winged hussars were, what the sort of things that they did, you can go to Royal Armouries and see a display. So the white eagle is the symbol of Poland, and the black eagle, we've already seen the black imperial eagle of Germany in Ernest Jackson's ideal, and this is defeated by Poland. Poland actually in the First World War were not an independent nation. They were sort of a region of Austria-Hungary, And they were pulled by both sides. They were pulled by the Russians on our side, and they were pulled by Austria-Hungary and Germany. And they actually fought on both sides in the war. Both us and Germany were sort of promising them independence, because this is what Poland really, really wanted.
Yeah.
They wanted to be an independent country with their own borders. This didn't happen until the end of the First World War. So here Dulac is sort of anticipating this, and he's presenting this in a really positive way. He's presenting Poland as our ally, as defeating Germany. He's presenting Poland as being on our side. And actually it's very, very clever in the way in which he visually aligns these black blasted out trees, which really by this point in the First World War have become this symbol of the destruction of the war.
Right,
but they are visually aligned by the blackness with the blackness of Imperial Germany.
Yeah, which is really clever, isn't it?
Very
clever use of colour. We have another question.
We have a comment, and Afabisa, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, but she just says,
"That's okay.
Thanks for this masterclass, it's brilliant."
So, a masterclass. That's really nice. I was going to just say about this as well. You mentioned, the artist's name was
Edmund Dulac.
Edmund Dulac. So Dulac was a watercolour specialist.
Yes.
And so I just think this is quite interesting when you were talking about Ernest and how he was teaching the techniques.
Yes.
So this would have been reasonably new to the artist, this printing technique?
What happened with lithography, I think I started to explain this, was that it sort of started to interest artists, and it started to become promoters, really sort of from the late 19th century onwards, as an artistic process with experimental possibilities.
Right, okay.
So this is in contrast, so what artists are trying to do at this point is rescue lithography from being viewed as a sort of a cheap method of commercial reproduction, which is what it was. So they want to reharness it, reclaim it as an artistic process.
Yeah.
And so actually the majority of these prints in this print portfolio were produced by what's called transfer lithography, which is where you make the drawing on specially prepared transfer paper first, and then the paper is then transferred onto the lithographic stone. Okay. It can either just be transferred, or it can be finished on the stone and then printed. But transfer paper was really sort of in vogue with artists from the end of the 19th century in France and then in Britain. It became it was something that was increasingly sort of worked on. Transfer papers were being sort of redeveloped and made better from 1910 onwards. And the president of the society that I think I might have mentioned, the Sennefelder Club, which was established in 1910 to promote lithography as an artistic process. So they held annual exhibitions in London. Yeah. They exhibited widely, throughout the world really. And many of the artists involved in this project, not just Ernest Jackson, who was a founder member, but many of them were either members of the Sennefelder Club, Frank Brownman was, or they exhibited at the Sennefelder Club exhibitions. So this project is coming at a real high point for lithography as an artistic process. So
there's been a lot of use and experimentation. Yes. Great.
Shall I talk more about technique? Whilst we're standing at the
absolutely, that would be great. Yeah.
So I don't know if you can zoom in a little bit, Hannah. So I did mention that Dulac was primarily a watercolour artist. So these greasy materials that we use in lithography. So they could be a greasy pencil. We could use the point of the pencil, or crayon. So you'd use crayon. You could use crayon on its point, or crayon on its edge. And I think along the sword here, you can see where crayon has been used actually on its edge, it's sort of horizontally drawn down. And there's also a greasy material which is a greasy ink used in lithography called touche, which can be painted on. And this is very clearly seen in Dulac's image, where you can see the feathers have actually been painted. Right, yeah. And you get this when you're using touche in lithography, you get this sort of weird, depending on how dilute it is, you get this sort of weird sort of reticulation, this sort of network of medium that you can sort of see in this lower part here as well. And I should probably mention that the colour in lithography, so each new colour requires a different stone. You start off with what we call a keystone, which has sort of the basic outlines on it. And then, so for every different colour, you ink up a new stone with each different colour. So we call those colour stones, and then they are applied on top and printed.
So a much more
sort of
involved
pieced together.
process. Yeah. And actually, in some ways, you can tell there's a limited use of colour.
There is,
to avoid.
Sure, and this is something that Ernest Jackson's particularly quite cautious of colour,
Right.
and this is something that artists who were developing this lithographic technique at this period are quite more interested in a pared back sort of quite limited colour palette. So I think probably the maximum number of colour stones that are used in this lithography is probably about 5.
Okay.
So and again, I think this is a response against the excesses of commercial lithography. You know, these highly coloured greeting cards with probably 10, 12, 20 colours on them. So artists are paring things back, getting things back to limited colour.
Okay. Brilliant. So those are the ideals that we've talked about.
Sure.
And then we have the efforts here, which, as you said at the beginning, are very, very different to the ideals in terms of the fact that, well, quite obviously they're black and white.
Yes.
And they were for a different purpose.
Yeah.
So more to galvanise those here
That's
in
right,
the country
yeah.
that were involved in different aspects of the war.
Absolutely.
So do you want to start from the beginning
I'll
here?
start from the beginning. So this is CRW Nevinson. So he's one of the younger artists who had been involved on the front lines in France. He volunteered as an ambulance driver for the French, and so he'd seen the fighting and the bloodshed firsthand.
Yeah.
He'd also witnessed enemy aircraft and Allied aircraft up in the sky, as he was on the front lines.
Right.
And so the Department of Information decided that he would be best suited to the subject that they allocated to him, called building aircraft. So he was actually the first artist who went up in a plane. This is in the air. So this is supposedly Nevinson sort of clinging on for dear life as the plane. He went up in aircraft with some colonel who apparently wasn't he learned afterwards, after he'd been up in plane, that he wasn't actually a very good pilot.
Oh.
But
so he's clinging on for dear life.
They didn't crash. Nevinson said, "Well, I thought he was fine." But he was, and he says in his autobiography that he felt at the end of his career that his work in planes, these incredible aerial views.
Yeah.
He was getting in his prints and his paintings were probably the best things that he did in his career.
But through probably the experience.
The experience. It was something really new and fresh, and to Nevinson and probably to many other people as well at this time. So let's look at his. So this is I think it's probably the second image in the 6. So each of the efforts artists. So there were 9 efforts. Yeah. Each designed by different artists. Mm-hmm. So each artist had to make 6 drawings that were made. Okay.
And they were responding to a different subject.
Responding to a different subject. Yeah. So Nevinson was building aircraft.
Yeah. So
this is called Swooping Down on a Taube, which is Nevinson's final image of the 6. A Taube was, which is the German word for dove. A Taube was a reconnaissance aircraft that could also drop bombs from its cockpit. So there's quite a lot of destruction was created by these German Taubes. And this is showing a Taube here, this sort of dove-like shape, bird-like shape, being, this Allied plane, this British airplane, falling out of the sky and there's actually that sort of little line there, there's a machine gun on the front of the plane to try and catch this aircraft before it can do any damage. And so this is Nevinson in his capacity as an official war artist commissioned by the government, by the Department of Information. This painting that's now in the Imperial War Museum in London is called A Taube, and he produced this in 1916. Hugely shocking image of the destruction that could be wreaked by one of these planes. So this is a dead child he witnessed had been killed in Dunkirk. So this is the difference between being an official artist, war artist commissioned by the government, so this is Nevinson in his non-official capacity. So he's painting death in quite a clear way, whereas in this print, that's produced for Efforts and Ideals, he's showing this incredible, super magnificent British plane swooping down like a hawk on its prey out of the sky. This amazingly dramatic, geometric searchlights lighting up the sky. In fact, this image had such a power to inspire and sort of stir emotion, or sort of patriotism almost. That one observer said that this was like Satan being chased back to hell by the blades of the seraphim. Wow. So it's like this sort of angelic image, and with the taub as Satan, so it's sort of symbolic meaning was ascribed.
I was going to say there's an incredible use of light and dark in that image as well, which has a real impact, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it really is interesting, the difference between a commissioned piece of work and an artist's own viewpoint of what was happening. I think that's just incredible.
Yes.
Okay, so
this is Eric Kennington. So this is the artist who I mentioned before, who had also he'd actually served as a soldier. He'd actually fought. So the Department of Information thought that he would best served in making the 6 drawings for making soldiers. So I think this is possibly the 2nd or 3rd image in the 6, called Ready for Service. And this, what Kennington was supposed to be doing in these 6 drawings was showing a conscripted soldier, showing the 3 months of intensive training that he would have to go through before he was sent to the front lines to fight. So Kennington follows this process, and he's showing soldiers sort of. He's sort of showing the everyman soldier. He's sort of championing the common soldier. So there's no sort of individuality. This soldier here who's ready for service is sort of gazing into the distance. Yeah. And in each different image of the 6, you can't, there isn't one soldier there's sort of use of quite dark shadows, so you can't see faces. There's back views like this view here of the soldier, which is actually called over the top. So this is a soldier who is preparing to go over the top. Right. Now we all know the sort of chaos and terror that met men as they climbed out of the trenches in the First World War. And you can see a little bit of that. You might be able to see a little bit of that there, but it's very, very difficult to make out.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And what Kennington's focusing on is this, this strong soldier who's climbing out. This other man, struggling, the struggle to get out the trenches, and sort of a heroic image, really.
Absolutely. It's very much like ready for duty.
Ready for duty,
isn't it? And ready to do their bit. And as you say, one of the most sort of terrifying aspects of. The sort of accounts in the First World War involves the trenches. Yeah. So,
but Kennington's also, he'd served as a soldier. He served in the trenches. So, you do get this incredible detail of these, these things that were, lying around that the common soldier would be using, that would be around. Yeah, tools and equipment and all those sorts of things. So, there was a sense in which she was giving a sort of a true, real image of life in the trenches, life of the common soldier, the conscripted soldier.
Right, okay. And so then,
I haven't been able to show this space to show examples from all 9 of the efforts, but I thought I'd show George Clausen's efforts, one of his efforts. So he was allocated the theme of making guns. So he went to North London to munitions factories, and he produced a series of 6 images inside factories. And Clausen was known for, he was one of the very, very well-known established artists. In 1904 and 1905, he was Professor of Painting at the Royal Academy. He was a Royal Academician, so he was very well established, very well known. And he was actually the father-in-law of Thomas Derrick, the illustrator who worked within the Department of Information, who had been, along with Ernest Jackson, had been instrumental in sort of setting up this scheme, this portfolio of efforts and ideals. So he was one of the first artists who was actually commissioned to work on this portfolio. And you can see, we're talking about lithographic technique. Artists were becoming experimental. Transfer lithography meant that they could be more spontaneous. They could, you know, making drawing on paper and then transferring it to stone. So they could actually carry this paper around with them, and make marks and experiment with technique. And what's quite common in quite a lot of these lithographs is this method of scratching. So artists were using tools like razor blades and scalpels to make all these scratches, these marks. And this could be started on transfer paper, and it could be finished on the stone before it was printed. And you can see this sort of scraping to create these, you know, these bright highlights. This is in the furnace. This is like, you know, this explosion, fireworks, sort of like explosion of you know, welding. This bright light of the furnace that was the furnaces that were used in munitions factories.
No, that's really, well, as you say, the techniques are really interesting. And I could be wrong saying this, but my feeling with prints were that it was often quite hard to be really expressive with some methods of printing. And I mean, this obviously completely and utterly
totally. Sort of lithography opened up really for experimentation.
Absolutely, and it's quite nice, you know, being able to sort of see this sketchy sort of approach down the bottom. And so that's like a sort of furnace, is it?
It's a furnace, right. Yeah, it's called the furnace.
Yes, right, of course,
But it's incredible, and Clausen was best known for painting barn interiors, actually. And you know, you get a sense in which, you know, these interiors that he's drawing in the munitions factories are not dissimilar to, I mean, this sort of strong vertical. It's almost like the posts that you see in his barn interiors, you know, the crook beams and strong horizontals and verticals that you're getting in his sort of quite gloomy barn interiors that he's painting as a sort of an impressionist technique.
Great, and so then that brings us on to the final.
The final one, which is by David Muirhead Bone. He was actually Britain's first official war artist. He was made an official war artist in May 1916, and then he was commissioned to also work on Efforts and Ideals. So he was allocated the theme of building ships. So this is a view of the Clyde shipyards in Glasgow, and this is an incredible aerial view of the shipyards. These long poles are called stocks, so they're the external frameworks that we use to construct the ships. But he apparently worked with a sketchbook sort of strapped to his hand to get all these incredible aerial views, and showing the, you know, incredible expanse of the industry in the shipyards and all the work that was going on. You know, the men working here, you know, is pretty much, you know, ant-like to the scale of the production, the scale of the effort that was happening.
It's depicted that
time.
Really well. And again, I can't help but sort of looking at the techniques, but this sort of thick, heavy line.
Yes. This is crayon lithography. Using crayon.
And then the detail in the distance. It's really effective.
Really incredible. Yeah, you're seeing this with the munitions factories chimneys, I think, or some kind of industry going on there. So.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Okay.
That has been really, really fascinating.
Very good.
I think that probably brings us to the end. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. We'll post this on Facebook afterwards, so if you haven't been able to watch this live, you can watch it on our Facebook page after. And
my blog as well, you've mentioned.
Well, we haven't mentioned the blog yet, so also Rebecca has kindly written us a blog about these prints, so there's more detail there. In fact, you'll find a link for it just on this Facebook page. So on the post below this live, you'll see the link to the blog, so they can have a look at it there. The other thing I noted on Twitter this morning was a Botanic Garden this Sunday is actually going to be free entry. It's ordinarily paid entry. So Remembrance Sunday, a chance to have some reflection in a nice peaceful area of the city. So I would highly recommend going to the garden. But thank you once again, Rebecca. That was really, really interesting. And we'll do more lives in the future. But once again, thanks for watching, everyone. And that's the end. Thank you.